Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. It is the daily. It is Thursday, and we are rolling right along because Bill has provided us some more wonderful content to break down. That is Bill Landis. That's Jeremy Birmingham, and I am Austin Ward. And part two, the defensive side of the ball. Bill's always accurate, never wrong, 100% satisfaction guaranteed. Depth chart is out. I have a feeling at the end there could be, spoiler alert, some battling going on between two of the panelists, but that's what we call a teaser. But just big picture, Bill, how much thought, I know a lot of thought went into it. How much conflict was there in your mind going through a defensive depth chart post spring?
Really none at all until the end, until what you're alluding to at the safety position. Not just with the position that is going to make Berm angry, but the group as a whole, which I think we've talked about quite a bit this spring. Like, they have a lot of players there that I think are good and can help the defense. I just don't know how they're going to use them. So, but other than that, like, I thought that the front seven is fairly straightforward. Like, you can wonder about a couple things and roles and stuff like that, but like who's going to play and like who is above whom in the pecking order, I think is fairly straightforward for the defensive line and the linebackers.
Is that the same case in your mind, Berm?
Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot of things to really bicker about. Or, I mean, it seems like on offense, we've talked all spring about how the offense, you are not really getting a complete picture of what this team's going to look like because a lot of guys are out. And then you have the questions on the offensive line. You have the question at quarterback. As long as Tommy Eichenberg and Steel Chambers are back at linebacker and healthy, which we fully expect them to be, it seems like a pretty clear-cut case for the starting 11 for like rep one at Indiana, I think, based on what we saw all spring.
Right. The biggest question is maybe not necessarily who is going to start. And Bill and I talked about this on Tuesday, like how much maybe Jim Knowles is willing to rotate more in positions. Like, we've obviously seen them do that on the defensive line. They did not do that really in any way, shape, or form at linebacker. There was some of that at times at safety with Josh Proctor starting the year with the first unit, missing a tackle against Notre Dame and then never coming back. Like, there was some willingness to adjust there, but I felt like even that sort of dissipated by the second half of the season. And if, Ronnie Hickman missed a play or missed a couple assignments, like, he still wasn't going anywhere. Maybe that will be different because there's probably not just enough depth and familiarity with the system, but also that Jim Knowles and Perry Eliano and Tim Walton and James Laurinaitis now and Jim Knowles, like Larry Johnson, all those guys have more familiarity with the personnel. Maybe that lends itself to that. That's really the only question. I think the guys that are going to play first against Indiana doesn't seem to be any surprise there.
Yeah, Bill, how much of that do you think a year ago was because Jim Knowles came from Oklahoma State where he had 11 guys, and that's pretty much the extent of the depth. Perry Eliano came from Cincinnati where he didn't have a lot of depth behind Sauce Gardner and Kobe Bryant. Tim Walton coming from the NFL where there's only 53 guys on the roster. Like, how much of that do you think is just philosophy of saying, I have to play my best players all the time, I have to play the starters all the time, versus not knowing how to rotate in guys at that level? Like Larry Johnson, we criticized him last year for probably doing it too much at the inconvenient times, but I don't think we ever had a problem with Larry rotating his guys to keep them fresh. It was just a question mark of why are some players not in at the end of the game when the things mattered the most. But I think from a philosophical standpoint, it might just be those guys aren't coming from situations where they had that many guys to rotate before.
I had not considered that, but I think it does make sense, right? Because the idea, like, oh, we're going to play a lot of guys, but then like in practice, it's probably very different. Like, feel of the game and when to do that and how much you want to adhere to matchups and those kind of things. Probably is a little bit of a transition period there, something to get used to that the guys you just mentioned probably just didn't have the luxury of being able to get used to where they were previously, but they have it here. So I would hope that they embrace it. If that was part of the reasoning why maybe it didn't happen as much last year, I think I'm willing to entertain that idea. But now, as you get into year two and all those like depth pieces that maybe we wanted to see a little more of last year are presumably that much better, I think you need to lean into it a little more this year.
All right, let's start up front and at defensive end, where there was probably 2 seconds spent on the starting spots here.
Yeah, tackle. I mean, I guess the three
Defensive
are
end,
more,
I mean, not defensive tackle. I think there's a little bit more time to that.
yeah. End was a breezy exercise for sure. I guess like I don't know. I didn't even really think much about like who to put as the fourth guy between Caden Curry and Amari Abor. I think there might come a time where that does feel more interchangeable, but I don't think we're there quite yet. I think it's pretty clear that it's top two are JT and Jack, then Kenyatta Jackson, whose surge appears to be quite real, and then Caden Curry, and then we'll see what Amari can do this offseason.
I think that some of that is going to really be dependent on the defensive scheme of that day, because Caden Curry is not your traditional 4-3 defensive end. Put him out there and let him go against offensive tackles all day. Like, you want to move him around and stand him up, and you want to have him out there in explicitly pass rush situations. So, I mean, I think there's ways you can manipulate that or move him around that you could actually, I mean, not that you'd ever need to have Kenyatta Jackson, Omari Abor, and Caden Curry on the field at the same time. But I think those three guys are all interchangeable in some way. I also don't think there's maybe a player that's more important for Ohio State in this season than an elevated Jack Sawyer. Like, if he's able to step up and make that leap that people have been waiting for him to make, he changes the entire tenor of the defense, in my opinion, because you know what you're going to get pretty much out of JT Tuimoloau. But if he's able to be double teamed, it changes things a lot. And I think Jack Sawyer, in a more natural fit at defensive end where he's used to being, can be a real difference maker for Ohio State.
What would you call this stand-up, movable, versatile piece that you envision for Caden Curry?
I don't know, like Viper or something. The bullet, maybe the bullet. I don't know. I'm trying to think of the werewolf. That's what I'd like to be called.
The werewolf?
Yeah, I think the werewolf is the best. I don't know if anyone has the werewolf position, but they should. If someone around college football has the werewolf and it's being used, please, I'd like someone to tell me. If it's not, I'd like someone to do it, because I think that's the best way. Especially Caden's hair kind of looks like he could, transmorph at any moment.
Is there a period there if you're playing the werewolf position? Like the expectation is there are times where you're not a werewolf, right?
Only in night games. Werewolf's only in night games,
right? Okay.
Obviously.
Got it.
That coincides with how much Ohio State's using the Jack.
Yeah, but they're gonna play. They're gonna play a lot of night games.
Has to be a full moon, or you can't use the Jack package.
Defensive tackle. Your projected lineup was different than the one that started the spring game, Bill.
It was, but I feel like every time we watched the first team defense, like the starting tackle pair was different. It was some combination of Mike Hall, Tyleik Williams, and Ty Hamilton, and then one day randomly Jaden McKenzie was out there too with the one. So I think like someone said to me on the board at OhioStateRivals.com, like, I think Tyleik Williams will start over Ty Hamilton, and my response is like, okay, like they're all going to play the same amount, so I don't really care. And Ty did start over Tyleik last year, which I think is important and instructive. So those are the three. They're going to play a lot, and then it's a question of who can they get a fourth. And as we said coming out of the spring game, like I feel better about their ability to find a fourth or a fifth based on the way that position played this spring.
If everything Ohio State has shown us in the last year with the defensive alignment and defensive playing time has pinpointed the idea that nothing really matters more to this coaching staff than consistent play, right? So if you're not out there doing it every down, then it's hard to see you getting more reps than you had a year ago. That's why Ty Hamilton was ahead of Tyleik Williams a year ago. I don't think that that's changed since. So if Tyleik Williams, who is as disruptive as anybody in the country when he's at his absolute peak, wants to do that or can do that more often, then I think he should be on the field ahead of Ty Hamilton, because he does have the ability to be more of a playmaker and a play wrecker. But it's been pretty clear in his 2 years at Ohio State that he hasn't been able to do that play in, play out. So, and he's admitted as such. So is he able to take that next step to force himself to be on the field?
I think that was one of the most telling moments of the entirety of spring camp, was Tyleik Williams sitting down during defensive line media day and being like, well, why haven't you played more? Well, I was lazy when I got here. Okay. What do you need to do to be more consistent? I haven't been in very good shape. Okay. Those are pretty direct to the point. Like, it seems like sometimes his free 91 persona gives you a different perception of how he views his talents, but he was much more like honest in his assessment about the things that have held him back the last couple of years, everyone got excited, for what he was able to do in that, first month where he was getting playing time. And I think he had, five tackles for loss in 2 games. And it was like, oh my goodness, Ohio State's really got something here. But he was never able to sustain that, or hasn't been able to sustain that to this point. So that lineup could change for Ohio State depending on how Tyleik Williams internalizes the things that he has to do to become a more consistently effective player. Because the alternative then for Larry Johnson is to say, I trust Ty Hamilton to take the largest portion of the snaps. Mike Hall, you want to wear him out. I assume that Larry Johnson would want to make sure that he was ready to be Mike Hall in the fourth quarter of games. That's sort of been what's transpired with the way he's managed the rotation in the last couple of years. And then the case is like, well, if you can get 10 or 15 high level snaps out of Tyleik Williams and you're not sure how many more you get beyond that, then that's how you fall into the danger of being a rotational supplement for Ohio State. He's capable of being more than that. It's up to him to take the next step. I don't know what more Ohio State can give him to help him do that.
Yeah.
You would hope that it would click now, right? I mean, he's never had an opportunity like this. And we did talk to the defensive lineman earlier in spring. So, like, we didn't have a chance to catch up with Larry Johnson at the end. It's like, hey, what'd you think of Tyleik Spring? Or even talk to Tyleik about how he felt like he handled some of the things that you just mentioned, Austin. But every time we go out there and watch practice, like, he does something where you go like, whoa, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that 25 to 30 times a game. It's just a matter of, is it going to show up that much? And I don't know. I'm somewhat optimistic that it will, if only because I think the opportunity in front of him might get that to click a little better than it has the last 2 years. There's not, 4 guys that you could conceivably play in front of him. It's there for the taking for him. So I would hope that he grabs it, because if he does, then you're talking about a pretty freaky tackle tandem with him and Mike Hall. Like, I don't know if we've seen anything like the two of those at their best side by side. I don't think we've seen anything like that.
He doesn't have the 3 or 4 guys that could play in front of him, but what he will have is 3 young guys who are hungry coming behind him. And that is what you hope is a motivator for him, because what we saw in the last half of spring out of Hero Canoe was different. What I expect out of Caden McDonald and Jason Moore when they get to campus, even though it's hard to play as a true freshman at defensive tackle, those guys are physically a little bit advanced as far as compared to where Tyleik maybe even is still, just as far as his body goes. So I think that there's an opportunity maybe where you get a little bit of a fire, lit under you, just to make sure that, hey, I don't want to let these guys catch me.
All right. Well, that's the Rushman. And then probably another breezy exercise right here at linebacker. Not a lot of mystery at the top.
None, really. I guess I would be curious. I don't know. I think also maybe you and I just kind of talked about Steel Chambers and CJ Hicks. I'd be curious what Berm thinks about the idea of like separating Tommy and Steele in a way that would maybe invite more opportunity for CJ to rotate with Steele at will linebacker.
And that's why I asked Bob Carpenter on the live show on Monday, like, at what point does talent start to become so obvious that you have to find a way to put the kid on the field? And I think some of this actually can be mitigated for Ohio State this year. A year ago, it was really risky to take Steel Chambers or Tommy Eichenberg off the field because there was no depth in the secondary, and they were not exactly lighting the world on fire at safety in the last half of the season, where you could put a guy out there who might make a mistake or two at linebacker, but could make a big play. You had to have the solid guy who is just going to be in the right spot. Maybe he's not going to be there with as much thump. Maybe he's going to be there a fraction of a second slower, but he's going to be in the right spot. I do think that CJ, the talent is so clear that he physically is the most gifted linebacker on the team. You have to find a way to put him on the field. That's, Bill, your Too Deep doesn't talk about the jack exactly as a spot, because when we're talking about Mitchell Melton, who we shouldn't leave off the list at defensive end or linebacker, wherever he fits, like, there's a clear path to the playing field and a clear desire to put Mitchell Melton at that jack position for Ohio State. That is an opportunity to keep CJ on the field along with Steele and Tommy, so you don't necessarily have to break them up. But I do think that there's a case to be made, which is what Bob was talking about on Monday. If you're at Indiana here in week 1 and it's 14-7 in the second quarter, and the Buckeyes have Indiana pinned back inside of their own 25-yard line or whatever, why not put CJ out there for a series or two with Tommy and say, go see what can happen? You're not worried about Indiana hitting a 75-yard touchdown or something like that on you. They don't have the weapons to make that a real threat. So you have to find some ways to integrate all of these guys into the rotation. That is unequivocally the biggest mistake Ohio State made a year ago, in my opinion, when you had the first 6 games of the year when Ohio State was playing better than anybody in the country. You were blowing everyone out left and right, and you didn't get DJ on the field at linebacker. You didn't get Gabe Powers on the field. Like, there was no explanation to not put them out there. At least see what they can do. If they give up a big play, who cares? You're up 49-0 at Michigan State. Like, just put them out there and see what happens. I think that it's obvious they have to do that more this year.
I think I know that you just pulled that hypothetical out of thin air, but I wouldn't say that like Ohio State has to start doing this in high leverage situations. If that's a 7-point game in the second quarter on the road against Indiana, I know that I'm just talking specifically about a hypothetical you threw out, but like that's not the time that Ohio State needs to do it in my mind. You need your best players in high leverage situations. If they're in the red zone and you're in a 7-point game, then the same thing that I have said about the defensive line needs to apply to the linebackers and the safeties. Ohio State has a chance to swing the game significantly in that circumstance. The only reason I bring that up is that Ohio State didn't do a great job of taking Tommy Eichenberg and Steel Chambers off in the third quarter when it may be a 21 or 28-point game against somebody like Rutgers or Maryland. Maryland didn't play out that way, but just for the sake of argument, they played longer in blowouts than they needed to. And I don't really know why that was. That's the situation where when Ohio State is up by a couple scores and then you have some margin for error, that's when that development needs to occur. There's nothing more for Tommy Eichenberg or Steel Chambers to prove at this point. There is a lot of development and room for growth and reps that need to be given to CJ Hicks or Gabe Powers or Reed Carrico. So that's probably where I would like to see the adjustment made. It's not so much, let's just go see what they can do in a meaningful spot. Like Ohio State's trying to win a national championship. Like,
yeah, I agree.
But
I want to ask you this, though. I don't mean to cut you off. But what makes diamonds? Is it pressure or is it being out there in the fourth quarter when you're up 40 points? I think I think you put a kid out there and you say, let's see what you can do in this situation that matters, because the game changes, the adrenaline changes, the mode changes when you're out there and it's okay. Mop up time. That's what I'm saying. You don't do it in mass. You do it piece by piece, in a calculated strategery type of way.
I wouldn't ask you to go out and not play any. People hate when I say golf, but you don't just go straight from the putting green to go win the Masters. Well, no. Pressure also bursts pipes. Like, you build to it, you grow. Exactly. And that's the part that I think that Bill has mentioned. Like that was absent a year ago from the plan from Ohio State, and they're never going to get that opportunity back. But they can't make that mistake again. I don't think that you put them in a spot where it's like you could win or lose a game by trusting somebody to go do that. That's not the right approach.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The second quarter at Indiana, not at Notre Dame. I mean, you are going to beat Indiana if you do things like a normal Ohio State football program. That's when you have at least some. I mean, think about J.K. Dobbins starting at 2017 at Indiana, right? Like, you just say that's a game that Ohio State was going to win no matter what. It doesn't matter if they put Mike Weber out there or whoever out there. Like, but you put him out there and you say, hey, let's see what you can do against the Big Ten. Let's see what you can do when the first team defense or the first team offense and that team that we're playing against is on the field. I understand your point. I just think that Indiana's not playing the Masters. Okay. That's like playing. It's not playing the Masters. It's playing TPC Sawgrass, right? Like, it's like a cool course and it's nice to be out there, but it's the Players Championship or something. It's not like the PGA, championship.
Yes, a tournament with a tougher field and a larger purse. A great example.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's less. You have more. More margin for error. Because it's not going to matter as much if you miss the putt, because you're still out there on the course, and then you're learning and preparing yourself for the Masters. People don't like when we talk about golf on this show. Bill, what's your opinion?
I don't like
Bill.
I don't like when you do.
Bill, be the arbiter of truth. Who's right? Who's wrong?
I think there are truth in both of your arguments. I I would understand like the trepidation of like throwing a guy who's never played into a high leverage moment in the opener that is a Big Ten road game. I agree that the Indiana is not the Masters, but that game I suppose could get tricky early on as Ohio State is working through some things. I think bare minimum, it has to be what Austin's talking about. Those guys have to play in blowouts and play a lot in blowouts because they're going to be your starters 2 years from now. But with a guy like CJ specifically, I think you need to leave the door open for a little bit more. I don't know what that looks like. Maybe it's you play them against Youngstown State and what's the other cupcake game they play?
Western Kentucky.
Western Kentucky. Thank you. Oh, that could
one of the country's most explosive offenses.
They throw the ball quite a bit. that could be interesting. But I want to see Tommy Eichenberg.
That's the Waste Management Open.
That's right. I want to see Tommy and Steele cooling it on the sideline against Youngstown State, like halfway through the first quarter, and CJ Hicks to play that entire game, so you can kind of see what you got. And I get it's not like the stiffest challenge; it's a FCS team, but it's a game situation that CJ's not been in before. I think you need to really embrace those opportunities because, say you throw him out there and he takes to it really well and he flashes and you like what you see, and then 7 weeks into the season, because you have that information, he is now a bigger part of the defensive plan. Like I don't think you can go into the season without a plan to make sure that he's on the field at every opportunity you get, that makes sense to get him on the field so that perhaps by the end his athleticism can be a difference maker for you and you're playing teams with like for like athletes.
The way I view it is this. So 2021, Ohio State starts the season at Minnesota on the road. Again, we expect that that's going to be a similar scenario this year, right? Denzel Burke started that game at corner for Ohio State, and Ohio State had opportunities to play other guys at that spot. Legend Cavazos, Ryan Watts, etc. Watts started, obviously.
Watts did start.
That was a weird night.
Watts started opposite Denzel. If you put Cavazos out there as the starter in that game and you don't get a chance to really see would Denzel Burke, who played fairly well his entire freshman season, have been the guy he was if you didn't know in week one that you could get that out of him? I think that it's a good enough game where you're going to get some sense of what he's capable of, but it's certainly not going to be the be all end all. And Ohio State has the luxury at linebacker where you don't need to keep him CJ on the field at Notre Dame if he's not out there being an absolute star. So I just, whatever they do at linebacker, it's clear that Tommy and Steele are 1 and 2 and should be. But the question was, how do you mix these guys up? How do you divide them? How do you separate them? And to mix in Cody, who played very well a year ago, and CJ, who obviously has more upside than anybody else at the spot. So the answer is you have to find a way. We're not in charge of doing it. We're not the people responsible for it. But it seems like it would be, as Bill said earlier in this spring, coaching malpractice to let that happen again.
I would go so far as to advocate, if I may not like the scenario of the second quarter at Indiana, when you're playing Youngstown State, I don't think any of the starters should play in that game. The long-term starters. I don't think that Tommy should play. I don't think that Steele should play. I don't think that Lathan Ransom should play. You can certainly dress them in case things get really weird, but these seasons are getting so long, and Ohio State has dealt with injuries, and every team does. They will again. Why risk it at all? Once you get past Indiana and you have to play a Big Ten game on the road to start it, and we've talked about developing for the future and getting young guys more reps than a year ago, I don't need to see those guys play a half against Youngstown State, and nobody needs to. You could say, well, you want to be fresh. You've got Notre Dame coming shortly after that. You want to make sure that guys are game ready and up to speed. And all. I will understand the coach's arguments to do that, but that is a prime opportunity. Every year they say, well, you don't get preseason in college football. You don't get to work through this stuff in game situations. Ohio State has one of those this year. There's no scenario where they could lose that game.
It is fascinating because this is probably the toughest schedule Ohio State's had in a long time. 6 road games, but it's the first time in a while they've had this true fluff game in there. So, and it's right between Indiana and Notre Dame. So there is an opportunity, I think, to use that as a get right weekend.
Okay.
I would just like to congratulate Lincoln Keenholz on making his first start against Youngstown State.
At wide receiver.
I didn't say that. Don't put words in my mouth, Bill. What a turn this linebacker conversation took.
See, you thought it was going to be easy.
Yeah, well, I thought that when there might be some friction, it would come in the secondary. And why is that, Bill?
Because I projected Jahad Carter, the 2-year starter at Syracuse, whom Ohio State went into the portal to bring in to upgrade its safety position because they didn't think it was good enough to start in the fall over Cam Martinez, because like he has to start over somebody, and Cam seemed like the nickel position seems like the most obvious place to put Jahad Carter. Like that. So here's my question. They got him and they're not going to play him? Like,
let's realize that we're skipping cornerback entirely to talk about safety.
We're not skipping it. Not skipping it.
I'm going to say this, folks. You know what day it is. It's clear that Bill is high if he thinks Ohio State is going to start Jahad Carter in game 1 over Cam Martinez, who was the clear-cut starter all the way through spring camp, is certainly in a position to maximize the summer as much as he did the spring, who's emerging as a real leader on the team, not just as far as at safety. Obviously, both those guys are going to play a lot of reps. But when we see Ohio State roll out their first-team defense against Indiana, which is the point of this exercise, provided that Sonny Styles is not out there in the place of that third safety, it will be Cam Martinez. That's so obviously.
We should place a wager on that.
Units.
Yeah.
I'm not a degenerate gambler like you guys. I'm a responsible.
Since when?
I'm a responsible.
You rapidly became much more of a degenerate than
I've not placed a wager in weeks. Can the same be said for thou?
Nope.
No, I haven't placed one in at least 30 minutes though.
Yeah, so precisely. But no, the point is, I mean, you do go out and you bring in Jahad Carter because you imagine that you're going to need some help at safety. But then you get back Josh Proctor, who you didn't anticipate coming back at that point. You get a much different version of Cam Martinez from the end of a year ago, who coaches have been raving about all spring, the way that he's worked, the way he's learned, the way he's excelling. It's not, I think, an accident that the addition of Jahad Carter may have actually been the boost that Cam Martinez needed to prove to himself that, hey, I need to go a little bit further than I'm going. But they're both going to play. And this is where, we talked about on the Wednesday edition when talking about the offense, like the slash position, it's not, or it's both of those guys are going to be starters at some point throughout the season, I think. So it's just about the matchups and who is playing better that week, who's healthiest that week. But all things being equal, if Jahad Carter, who missed the last half of spring, and Cam Martinez, who continued to get better through the spring, I think that Cam Martinez will be the guy who goes out there with Josh Proctor and Lathan Ransom as the starters.
I've said this a number of times on the boards at ohiostate.rivals.com. I understand, and feel free for anybody to take Bermanized Cam Martinez talk with as many grains of salt as you wish. We can't guarantee anything is going to happen for anybody on this particular roster, let alone Cameron Martinez. What we saw throughout spring was by far the best and most comfortable he's looked. Even if that's just our opinion, the coaching staff continued to put him out there with the starters from day 1 through day 15. Now, you can say the last 2 weeks that Jahad Carter wasn't available. Not sure that would have changed anything the way things were going. Cameron Martinez was lining up and getting one-on-one reps against Marvin Harrison in the slot, and he won more than I'd say anybody else when they had that opportunity. Just in the viewing periods that we had, he had 3 pick sixes in practices throughout camp. Those are just anecdotes. Like I don't know what's going to happen. I agree with what you're saying, Bill, about Jahad Carter. When you line it up that way, talking about someone who could have gone pretty much anywhere he wanted after 2 years of starting in a Power 5 secondary and picking Ohio State, he did that for a reason, and Ohio State took him for a reason. I don't. You're not wrong about that. That is a fact, and it is a good one to keep in mind. But also, competition is healthy, and if Cameron Martinez is able to win it, I don't think people should say, well, gosh, how are they playing this guy ahead of Jahad Carter? Well, it's not for fun. Like, they were battling through the first 11 practices, and Cameron Martinez was ahead. Now, was that because of experience and because Jahad Carter was learning a new system? Maybe. We'll see. There's going to be 29 more practices for them in August before they play against Indiana. But I think there's probably a rush for people to indict Cameron Martinez for the missed assignment and the blown play, which we all saw happen. No one's pretending like it didn't on November 26th, and forgetting that you're going to make some bad plays when you put guys in situations that they haven't been before, like pressure's making diamonds, and on that day that it bursts pipes. But you also get to learn through that. And I think that he has. We'll see. It's not a prediction from me. I just think that he is ahead of schedule. And if people are concerned about Cameron Martinez being the starter coming out of spring, I don't think that they should be.
I think they're both going to play. And putting Jihad first, I did not, and I think I wrote it, like I did not want it to come off as being dismissive towards Cam's progress, because I saw it too. I think he is a better player now than he was a year ago. There are two safeties in that room that have proven college production. One of them is Lathan Ransom. One of them is Jihad Carter. I think both those guys are going to play probably more than anybody else at the safety position, if I had to guess, in 2023. But I am happy to be wrong. And
I don't think you should be happy to be wrong. You should. I mean, the best players are going to play, and so I just don't think it's been entirely figured out yet. But I'm going to ask you guys this question. I think it's an important one. Do college coaches generally make a habit of playing the worst player? Or do they play the guy that gives them the best chance to win?
I think that is a complicated question. I think well-intentioned college coaches oftentimes prioritize like safety and comfort over ceiling. And I think Ohio State has done that
to a fault,
not infrequently. So,
well, that takes us back to the question on CJ Hicks, right? Like that is, I think, the internal battle you have to have. Would you consider then, Austin or Bill, that this situation, knowing what we saw out of Cam Martinez a year ago, that doesn't feel like the safe choice, right? So, because you would have think that they would look back and go, well, there was this mistake here, there was this mistake here. He's smaller, but they keep putting him out there. Why would that be the case?
Well, because they like the athleticism. They've seen the cover skills. The part that when I talk about Cameron Martinez, and there have been a number of threads about this week, I've talked about Cameron Martinez a ton on there. I think the biggest issue that has held him back is having to play every spot in the secondary. And the reason that he's done that is because the Ohio State coaching staff, multiple iterations of it, believes in Cam Martinez's athleticism and cover skills and ability to tackle, that he could play cornerback, free safety, strong safety, or nickel. They've tried him everywhere. I don't think they're doing that because they can't find a role for him. They're doing that because they think he can handle all of them. It's done a disservice to him, in my mind, that he hasn't been able to train and focus on one, because he was primarily an offensive player in high school and he's transitioning to defense. I think that has made it harder. He has not maximized his game reps. There's no argument to the contrary. Like, he's got to be better. But I think that they have maybe figured that part out. And what Bill's saying is correct. Like, I think that in general, college coaches are risk averse and favor experience in a program and veteran knowledge and all those things and culture, and try not to disrupt that. And I don't think that that's the situation in the Cameron Martinez versus Jihad Carter conversation. And the other part of that we have to consider, which ties into the rest of Bill's projection in the secondary, is that this isn't even just a conversation between those two players.
Yeah. When
Ohio State went to bigger personnel in the spring game or in scrimmages that we saw, that the substitution there was to put Sonny Styles in the game. And he became the nickel, but that wasn't necessarily the role he was playing. I mean, that was in the box, and it was the stuff that we saw him do against Georgia and Wisconsin last year. So that position has more than two people that can play it.
That's the unicorn package, by the way.
The unicorn? Yeah, that sounds right.
When Sonny's out there. Because he's a linebacker, defensive end, and safety, and corner.
But that's a very long answer to say that Ohio State is now in a position to do with the unicorn spot or the nickel spot or whatever they want to call it a lot more than they were in the past. They let Tanner play that all year because he was comfortable in the scheme. And now you're seeing stuff like putting in an extra cornerback in certain situations, and Jair Brown and Ryan Turner did that. I think that Cameron Martinez is leading because of his cover skills, and that Ohio State has at times thought that he could play cornerback as well. When it becomes a running situation, I think that they will be more likely to sub than they have been in the past. At least that's where it seems to be going.
I think I agree with that. I think they will have like more bespoke game plans with their just the versatility and different kind of guys they have at the safety position. And I think to get back to a question Berm asked a few minutes ago, I think both Josh Proctor and Cameron Martinez are with the ones because they're older and have been in the program longer. But that doesn't preclude them from like getting put in that spot and then taking it. So like I am open to that idea too. That like they were given the opportunity and they made the most of it. And are currently making the most of it. I think the initial reasoning for them being there is because they've just been in the program longer.
I agree. I mean, that when you go into spring, you start it that way, and then you force other guys to take the spot from them. Mm-hmm. That clearly didn't happen at either spot, which is, I think, a little bit frustrating for Ohio State fans who are wanting to see guys like Kai Stokes. Like you would expect that he would have taken a major step up, but we also don't know if he didn't, because maybe it was just the fact that Josh Proctor, the light is on and he's healthy. So you don't know that it's not always a no-sum game. It's not like, well, Josh took the job, so that means Kai didn't get better. Like Kai probably has gotten a lot better, but you have 10 guys in that room. And we haven't even talked about, how do you deploy a healthy Court Williams if he's able to go? Like there's a lot of parts that are still in this room that need to figure out. But if you're looking first snaps against Indiana, it seems like we have a fairly good idea who those three will be. That's all. Now, does that mean anything for the first snaps at Michigan? Not at all. I mean, that's 3 months later.
Right.
Well, now we have to skip the cornerbacks. We've been talking too long. Sorry.
Cornerbacks are easy.
Yeah, fairly straightforward. Yeah.
Well, I mean, what's going to be interesting is how Jermaine Matthews and Calvin Simpson-Hunt push Jair Brown and Ryan Turner, in my mind, for that fourth spot. Because as Bill wrote in the column at ohiostate.rivals.com, like there's the three. And we can see a scenario, I think, where those three are rotated in like Ohio State wanted to do for the last decade and did pretty extensively under Kerry Combs when they had that run of NFL first-round corners. Between Denzel Burke and Jordan Hancock and Davis Enigmanosin, if they're all healthy, all three of those guys have to play. We've seen a totally different version of Jordan Hancock and Denzel Burke this spring than we've ever seen at Ohio State.
We sure have. It's been fun to watch. I'm really trying to temper my expectations because of the situation at the receiver position, but it's hard not to when you just like go out there and every time you're out there, they're doing something to like get you excited about the trajectory of that entire position group. So, yeah, I don't know. I love the three they have, and if they can get a fourth out of those younger guys, then like that's great. But I think Ohio State is trending toward getting back to being what we expect them to be at that position.
Yeah, not a lot of. I don't have anything to add to that. You guys have covered it all, and that's would wrap it up. I didn't actually skip any positions today, which is a real plus. I'm trying to learn through failure.
We're not talking about the punter.
Just no,
kidding. I'm just kidding. That's a Jesse Mirko spot. It's locked in. Right. No questions.
What? I mean, we can do a special team show.
No questions, Your Honor.
Like that's just what we did in like pre-spring. We're not going to lump in kickers with the offense and punters with the defense. We just like have a special team show. And that was the longest one we did.
I don't think we need to do that.
I don't think we need to I don't know how that happened. But that one, we could also talk about Cameron Martinez and returning punts, but that would be.
Can I ask something of America, if I could?
Absolutely.
In the comments today, folks, we're heading into the off season. Tomorrow, of course, is Friday. You know what that means? It means it's Freaky Friday on the Podcast Daily, and we're going to try to get players to join us on the show. Let's just, we have a whole off season. Who do you guys want to hear from? That's the question. Just put it in the comments. Tell us who you're interested in hearing from, and we'll do our darndest to get them on the show, whether it's this week or next week or whenever. But that's all. We want to hear from you, America. Your opinions matter.
What about all the other countries that watch this show?
Mm-hmm. I think I've checked the analytics. I think we have like 1 or 2 viewers in Canada. That's about it. I don't think we're going
to. Do we have any in Estonia?
Because it's 420, Bill. Really? Grow up.
No, but actually, that joke kind of worked well.
You too. So many shenanigans.
Grow up. Bill.
Enjoy. We hope you all have a happy April 20th, and then we'll see you again on 4/21 for Freaky Friday. Thanks for joining us on the podcast daily to look at the defensive depth chart. It was a long one, but we hope you made it to the end with us. For Bill and Burr, I'm Austin. We'll talk to you later.